After months of fruitless job searching, I was getting desperate. Then I saw the ad, night guard wanted. Smaller town grocery store needs, must be reliable and vigilant. $20 per hour. It was one of those flung-out lifelines which one cannot really afford to ignore. 2 days later, I was standing outside Riverside Market, a small grocery store at the edge of town, signing on a one-page contract with barely any fine print. The place was unnervingly quiet, even at midnight. The erratic flickering of the fluorescent lights overhead cast long, distorted shadows along the aisles below. The air smelled faintly of bleach, with a musty tone hanging in there despite its freshness, a sign of neglect. Inside the small security office, a note was waiting for me on the desk, held down by an old coffee mug. The handwriting was cramped, almost rushed, and as I read the words, this strange chill ran down my spine. Night shift guidelines. Patrol each aisle every 45 minutes. Do not linger around the storage room. If you hear footsteps behind you, do not turn around. Return any shopping carts you find in the aisleways up to the front. You are never, under any circumstance, to enter the back stock room after 2 a.m. If at any time the store lights begin to flicker in a pattern, you are to immediately exit the building and wait until the lights return to normal. You should never approach the customer service desk after midnight. You are not to view camera 3 between the hours of 1 to 5 a.m. I laughed, half expecting someone to pop out and say that it was all a joke. But nobody did. The store was quiet, a feeling of unease settled in the bottom of my stomach. The instructions were just so strangely specific, almost warnings rather than rules. Having nothing better to do, I started my first patrol. Aisles of perfectly stocked and eerily pristine openness stretched before me. I walked slowly, mostly out of habit, glancing over my shoulder as if trying to shake a feeling of being watched. It was just past 12:15 a.m. when I finally made my way to the storage room. The door was closed, but it didn't stop the nagging sensation that something was off. The fluorescent light above the door buzzed with a louder hum than the other lights, and cast a dim, yellowish glow no deeper than across the doorframe. My fingers wanted to snap toward the doorknob, but Rule 4 repeated like a mantra in my brain. I did, made myself walk away from it. Back at the security office, I sat down to review the cameras. The screens showed static shots of each aisle, perfectly ordinary, except for camera 3. It was pointed toward the customer service counter at the front of the store. The counter looked normal, but the shadows there seemed too dark, somehow denser than the rest of the store. I debated killing camera 3, but something stayed my hand. It was as if turning it off would have been a breach of etiquette, as if I were compelled to keep on watching when every human instinct was screaming at me to look away. I glanced at my watch. 12:30 a.m. time for the next patrol. Stepping back out into the main floor, the silence felt heavier, thicker. The hum of the freezers, the squeak in my shoes, everything sounded louder with stillness. I did my rounds, counted each aisle as I went by, kept my head down near the storage room and resisted the urge to look behind me. Then, at 1 a.m., the lights flickered. Once. Twice. 3 times, in rapid succession. My heart really thudded in my chest as I remembered Rule 5, if the store lights flicker in a sequence, go to the break room and stay there until they stabilize. I burst into the break room, slamming the door shut behind me, and sat, panting. The flickering stopped, but the uneasy feeling didn't pass. I looked sideways at the monitor showing camera 3. The screen flickered, and for a split second, I could have sworn I saw something, a hazy silhouette of someone standing by the customer service counter. I blinked, and it was gone. What was left of the night dragged along painfully, as if every minute was sprawled out before me like an agony. I tried to close my ears to every creak and whisper that seemed to emanate from the aisles. By the time my shift came to an end, I was virtually running out the door, my head reeling with the bizarre rules and the chilling things I'd seen. I thought, driving away from Riverside Market, that I would be returning the next night, but inside, deep, I wasn't so sure I wanted to. I tried to shake off the unsettling memories of the previous night when I went in for my second shift at Riverside Market. It was only a job, after all, I told myself, and I couldn't let a few stupid rules and some flickering lights freak me out. I tried my best to walk in with an air of confidence, but my gut was screaming the opposite. Inside, I found another note on the desk in the security office. In that same cramped handwriting, but somehow the words felt heavier, like a warning. Additional rules. Do not engage anyone you see after midnight, even if they speak to you. If you hear someone call your name, ignore it. Avoid looking into the mirrors in the restroom. Stay out of aisle 5. I let out a sharp exhale, a nervous laugh escaping before I could help it. Avoid aisle 5? Yesterday, it was the back storage room, and now this. Every fiber of my logical mind wanted to laugh it off, to discard all of it as some kind of quirky prank from a manager with a sadistic sense of humor. But something about that note felt real. And after last night, I wasn't quite as sure of myself. I pocketed the note and began my first patrol, keeping my steps quick and quiet as I moved through each aisle. Everything seemed normal, but the air was thick with an uneasy stillness. For all intents and purposes, the store was holding its breath and waiting. I made my way towards aisle 5, my footsteps now much slower. The lights above it seemed a bit weaker than those above the others. Shadows cast by these very lights were doing the tango and twisting in ways impossible to define. My pulse quickened with the note's warning, stay out of aisle 5. But my curiosity got the better of me. I took a tentative step closer, craning my neck to peer down the aisle. It looked empty. Perfectly normal. Just rows of canned goods and dry snacks, with nothing out of place. Then, as I took a step back, I caught a flicker of movement out of the corner of my eye, a shadow darting across the far end of the aisle. I froze, my heart hammering in my chest. Hello. I called, my voice barely above a whisper. There was complete silence. I stood stock still, hearing nothing, not a whisper, not a murmur, nothing. I retreated another step back and started turning around to walk away when suddenly, down that aisle, came a faint whisper. It was soft, almost lyrical in tone, and sent a chill racing down my spine. I didn't wait around to hear any more. I whirled on my heel and hustled back to the security office, slamming the door shut behind me. My fingers trembled as I flipped through camera feeds, my eyes darting to each screen, searching for something. Anything to explain what I'd just seen. But the monitors showed nothing out of the ordinary. Aisle 5 was deserted, the shadows gone. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself, when I noticed camera 3, the one looking over the customer service counter. Something about that display didn't feel right. The shadows there seemed a bit thicker, almost as if they had substance, and I could have sworn that I saw a faint outline, like the shape of a person standing perfectly still. I hunched a bit closer, squinting at the screen. The figure didn't move. I must have just imagined it, I said to myself. It's just playing with my mind, the lateness of the hour, the silence, the odd set of rules. Strongly, I made myself turn away from the monitor, but the view that I was being watched still lingered, digging its claws into the back of my mind. I glanced at my wristwatch. 1:30 a.m. time for my next patrol. I didn't feel like getting up, but I did, and left the office. Weird, the store seemed a little darker now, the shadows longer than they should be. As I came toward aisle 5, I didn't permit even the edge of my eye toward that direction. All the other aisles were deserted, eerily pristine, but a nagging feeling that I wasn't alone kept teasing my psyche. Every now and then, I would catch the slightest noise, a soft rustling, or someone brushing against the shelves, or even the lightest tap of feet just behind me. But every time I turned, there was nothing. As I completed the patrol, I was all but running until I reached the safety of that security office. I shut the door behind me and took a quavering breath as I tried to steady myself. I was being ridiculous, I told myself. My imagination was getting the better of me. There was no one here. I was alone. Or so I thought. I turned back to camera 3 in time to catch the faint outline near the customer service counter shift, ever so slight, as if it were watching me. My blood ran cold. I told myself it was a trick of the light, that the camera glitched. But deep down, I knew that wasn't true. The rest of the shift was a blur of me huddled in the security office, eyes glued to the monitors, afraid to patrol the aisles once more. Every creak, every whisper, every flicker of movement on the screens made my heart race, and by the time dawn broke, I was out of there without a second glance. Driving back home, I was replaying the actions of the night in my head, shadows, whispers, a figure standing by the counter. The whole thought was just too much to let go of. A part of me was screaming to quit right then and never set foot in that store again. But I needed this job, I needed the money. And as much as it pained me to admit, I was curious. There was something off about Riverside Market, something I couldn't explain. And despite my better judgment, I wanted to find out what it was. The third night felt off the instant I walked in. The air was heavier, like the store itself was somehow watching. I tried to shake that off, telling myself I was being paranoid and it was merely nerves, but I just couldn't shake this feeling of impending dread hanging over me. There was another note in the security office waiting for me, this one shorter and more cryptic. The handwriting was the same cramped scrawl as before, but the words felt hurried, almost like someone had written them out in a panic. Tonight's additional instructions. If the phone rings, do not answer it. If you see someone standing at the entrance, do not let them in. Avoid all mirrors. My fingers shook a little as I read it. The new rules seemed darker, more sinister, like they gestured to something in the direction I didn't want to see. I pushed the note into my pocket, trying to square away the prickling sense of unease that settled over me. I glanced at the clock. 12:05 a.m. First patrol. I forced myself outside the office, focusing on the aisles, the neat rows of products, the hum of the freezers. But no matter how hard I tried, my mind continued to wander back to the note, the eerie warnings that seemed to seep into every corner of the store. Then, as I rounded the corner near aisle 3, I froze. There was a shadowy, dark, looming figure standing at the far end of the aisle. It was too far to make out any details, but I could tell it wasn't a trick of the light. My heart hammered in my chest as I tried to remember the rules. There hadn't been anything about aisle 3 tonight, but the first note had warned against lingering near the storage room, which was right behind this aisle. I took a stumbling step back, eyes locked on the figure. Then, in an instant, it had vanished, melted into the shadows as if it had never existed. I didn't waste any time. I ran to the security office as fast as my legs could carry me, fumbling for the key with shaking hands, locking the door behind me. My mind searched desperately for some explanation of what I'd seen, but there was none. It was almost as if the store was watching me, testing me. I made myself sit down, taking deep breaths as I scanned the monitors. Most of the screens showed nothing out of the ordinary, just empty aisles and neatly stocked shelves. That was until my eyes landed on camera 4, the one overlooking the entrance. There was someone standing outside. The figure was hardly visible, half concealed in the shadows, but I could trace the contours of a person standing perfectly still, beyond the glass doors. They didn't move, didn't try to get my attention. They just watched. I clenched my fists, the instructions from the note still ringing in my head, do not let them in. My every instinct told me to look away, to ignore it. But my curiosity got the better of me. I leaned closer to the monitor, peering at it hard, trying to make out any detail. The figure was tall, draped in shadow, its face obscured. But there was something about the pose that seemed faintly familiar, something nagging the back of my mind. Then, in an instant, just as suddenly as they had appeared, they were gone. I blinked, rubbing my eyes against the screen. But the entrance was empty. I flipped through the other cameras, peering down each aisle, but there was no sign of the figure. As though they'd never been there at all. My heart was still racing when the phone rang. A shrill sound cut through the silence, a knife through the quiet, making me jump. My hand had automatically reached for the receiver before my brain had caught up with the note, "If the phone rings, do not answer it." I jerked my hand back, clenching my fists as I glared at the phone. But it continued to ring on, keen insistent tones in a maddening pulse. I bit my lip, fighting the urge to pick up the receiver. That ringing finally stopped after what felt like an eternity, and somehow, the silence after that was even worse, thick and stifling, pushing down on me like a weight. Taking a shaky breath, I turned back to the monitors. Again, the screens showed nothing but the same empty aisles and silent shelves. I tried to convince myself it was all in my head, that I was overreacting. But deep down, something told me that this place wasn't okay, that it was hiding something that couldn't be explained. But as the hours ticked by, the store began to seem to darken, the shadows stretching out like fingers, twisting and curling in the corners of my vision. I could have sworn I saw movement on the monitors, flickers of shapes darting between the aisles, shadows melting into the walls when I looked at them directly. By the time the sun rose, I was barely holding it together. My mind was frayed, unraveling at the edges, as I stumbled out of the store and into harsh morning light. I told myself I wasn't ever coming back, that I'd find another job, any job, so long as I never had to set foot in Riverside Market again. But the following night, I found myself crawling back to that store, my hands clenching the wheel so tightly my knuckles had turned white. Something about this place was pulling at me, drawing me in, like some kind of thread I just could not stop unraveling. I didn't want to go back. Still, deep inside, I knew I had no choice. By the fourth night, I wasn't just scared, I was terrified. Every corner of Riverside Market felt like it concealed something, watched me. The unease carried over from the previous shifts clung to me, a shadow I couldn't shake, but I couldn't let it show. I needed the paycheck, and I needed answers. Opening the door to the security office, I found another note waiting on the desk. This one was different, though, the handwriting hurried, almost shaky, and the paper crumpled as if somebody had handled the paper with a trembling hand. Additional instructions for tonight. Do not look directly at the security monitors between 3 a.m. and 4 a.m. If you hear knocking on the door to the office, do not open it. Avoid the freezer section. The freezer section? That was new. And unsettling. But after everything I'd seen, I wasn't about to take any chances. I folded the note, slipping it into my pocket as I tried to calm my breathing. The store felt heavier than ever, the lights dimmer, and the silence more oppressive. I made myself start the first patrol, up and down the aisles at a snail's pace, my footsteps echoing off the floor. Everything was as it should be, row upon row of canned goods and snacks, perfectly aligned with nothing out of place. But passing the freezer section, a cold chill washed over me, and for reasons not clear or rational, I had an overwhelming urge to look away. With my heart pounding, I started walking faster, placing as much distance between me and the freezers as possible. The air almost seemed to thicken, growing colder with every step, and I could almost swear that I was listening to some light whisper, something so soft it passed into the silence. I ignored it, tucked my fists in to still myself, and went on patrol rounds. Then, when I reached the corner to the back storage room, the lights began to flicker on and off. I froze. Rule number 5 from the previous night: if the lights flicker in some sort of sequence, go to the break room and stay there until they steady themselves. I turned and started to walk as fast as I could back to the break room, swinging the door shut behind me. I sat down, trying to disregard the erratic pattern of the lights as they flickered on and off, casting strange, shifting shadows across the room. I bunched my fists, fighting the urge to peek outside. The lights finally steadied, and I took a shaking breath as a small surge of relief washed over me. But then, just as I was about to step out, I heard it. A faint, rhythmic knocking on the door to the security office. My stomach twisted as I remembered the new rule: if you hear knocking on the door to the office, do not open it. The knocking continued, soft but insistent, like someone was tapping just on the other side of the door. I backed away, pressed myself against the far wall, every nerve in my body screaming at me to stay put. It was louder, with growing desperation, until it became pounding against the door, each thud an echo in the small room. I could feel my heart racing, my shaking hands held before me as my head stayed fixated on the door, just waiting, just praying it would stop. And then, in an instant, just as suddenly as it had started, the knocking ceased. The silence in the room was heavy and choking, weighing upon me like some unseen mass. I made myself breathe a harsh reminder that I was still alone, that no one else was here. But the silence was just too great, like it was concealing something. I checked my watch. 3:02 a.m. And suddenly, the new rule swam into my mind like a tidal wave: mustn't look at security monitors directly between 3 and 4 a.m. Turning my back to the screens, I clutched the edge of the desk and wrestled my mind to think of absolutely anything else. But the itch was there, growing, gnawing. What would be the harm in just looking? I thought to myself it was a bad idea, that there was some reason for the rules to be there. My curiosity proved the stronger. I began turning around, my eyes scanned the monitors. At first, all seemed normal: empty rows of shelves, quiet racks, no trace of movement. That is, until I came upon camera 2, the one that views the frozen foods. A figure was standing there, shrouded in darkness, his face obscured by shadow. It didn't move, it stared directly into the camera as if it could see me right through the screen. My blood ran cold as I watched it, my mind racing with 1,000 questions to which I had no answer. Then, the figure moved. It leant its head on one side, almost as if it were studying me, and a fleeting smile etched itself, all but invisible in the poor light. I stumbled backward, my heart pounding, every fiber of my brain yelling at me to turn away. But I couldn't. I was pinned, riveted by the figure in front of me, unable to wrench my gaze away. The lights flickered once more, plunging the room into darkness for a brief, fleeting moment. When they steadied, it was gone. I stumbled back, my breathing ragged, my mind racing from what I had just seen. I looked at the time, 3:30 a.m. Only half an hour had passed, yet it felt as though an eternity had. It was the next half an hour crouching in the break room, glued to the floor, not even to glance at the monitors. Every sound, every creak, every whisper seemed amplified and filled that little room with the weight of dread. It was now 4 a.m., and I made myself look at the screens again. The figure was gone, the store dead quiet, but something of the unease still clung to me like a tightening vice. When my shift finally ended, I felt like I was literally coming apart at the seams. Stumbling out of the store into the chilled morning air, gasping for breath, my mind was nothing more than a hive of fear and confusion. I knew I should quit. I knew I was never supposed to return to Riverside Market. But as I drove away, one thought had gnawed at the back of my mind, a question which I couldn't shake. What was really going on in that store? And why did it feel like it was pulling me back? I had told myself I wasn't coming back, that I'd call in, quit over the phone, and never again darken the doors of Riverside Market. But on the 5th night, I was standing in the parking lot, staring up at the store's flickering neon sign. It was almost as though something had pulled me to come back, a pull that I could never explain. I had to have answers, and a part of my mind knew this would be my only opportunity to get them. The wave of dread just about washed over me as I entered the store. The lights seemed to be off, casting strange, warped shadows along the aisles. The air felt colder, thicker, like the building itself watched, waited. This time, there wasn't a note in the security office, but I didn't need one. The rules were seared into my memory by this stage: don't hang around, don't answer the phone, steer clear of the mirrors. Yet tonight, a little something whispered that the rules would not be enough to keep me safe. I checked the time, 12:02 a.m. I had 6 hours to survive, 6 hours to unravel whatever secrets this place was hiding. I took a deep breath and started my first patrol. The only greeting was the echo of my footsteps in empty aisles. Everything looked just about the same, yet there was silence, as if the silence was heavier, almost oppressive. I made my body keep moving, eyes darting to every shadow and each darkened corner, searching for something. It wasn't until I was passing the freezer section that it hit me. There was a presence, cold and dark, hanging just behind me. I started to walk faster, refusing to turn, even as the hairs on the back of my neck rose. But the presence followed, its steps perfectly in sync with mine, like an echo that wasn't quite right. I burst into the break room and slammed the door behind me, panting. I was done following the rules. Tonight, I was going to find out what really went on in this store. My eyes fell upon the monitors, and I froze. The image of that figure from the night before flashed in my brain, that dark shape standing in the freezer section staring at me. But tonight, I couldn't afford to look away. I scanned each screen once more, my eyes danced from aisle to aisle, but all seemed normal, just rows and rows of nothingness, silent and still. Then, on camera 4, I saw it. A figure, hardly visible, standing in the back storage room. It was tall and wiry, draped in shadow. Its face was obscured. My heart raced while I watched it, every instinct in my head screaming at me to look away, but I could not. I had to know what this thing was. It leaned its head to one side, almost as if it could feel my eyes on it, and then, almost listlessly, it began to move, gliding toward the door in light jerking movements. My hands were shaking as I watched, unable to tear my eyes from the screen. At the door, it hesitated for a moment and then spun around as its head snapped toward the camera, as if it could see me watching. A chill ran down my spine as it raised a hand, beckoning. I didn't want to go. Every part of me was screaming to stay put, to wait out the night in the break room. But something inside of me shoved me forward, a need to confront whatever was haunting this store. I forced myself out of the break room in slow, plodding steps, each footfall heavier than the last. The store grew dead silent around me, and even my breathing took on a shallow, rapid note. I walked toward the back storage room, each step echoing in the stillness, the shadows stretching and twisting around me like grasping fingers. I had stopped at the door, hesitated. There was an unnatural coldness emitting from it, seeping into my skin, but I couldn't turn around now. Taking a deep breath, I grasped the cold doorknob and shoved the door open. Inside, the room was empty. The walls were lined with shelves, piled high with boxes and supplies, and there was no sign of the figure I'd seen on the monitor. I took a shaky step forward, my eyes scouring each shadow, every corner. The silence was suffocating, weighing down upon me, filling my ears like a thick fog. Then I saw it. Through in the corner, barely visible in the dim light, a trapdoor. It was small, and it was made of old and splintered wood, half concealed beneath a pile of boxes. My heart racing, I approached, feeling with every step as if I was being dragged down into some terrible dream. I crouched, grasping at the edges of the trapdoor, and pulled it open. A flight of dark stairs curved downward into the blackness, the air was heavy and stale, a whiff of rot. Every fiber in my body screamed, "Stop. Turn around and run." But I couldn't. I had to know. I stepped onto the first stair, then the next, the creaking of wood beneath my weight. The darkness swallowed me as I went down, each step taking me further away from the light, away from safety. By the time I was standing on the last bottom step, I was enveloped in pitch blackness, the silence pressing into me from every side. Then I heard a faint whisper that was echoing from the darkness. "Ethan." My blood ran cold. I spun around, trying to see where it came from, but there was complete darkness around me. The whisper again came, soft, taunting, and it almost sounded as if someone had spoken just behind me. "Ethan." I stumbled backward, my heart racing as I tried to steady myself. Yet the whispers grew louder, echoing around and around me, filling the space with their cacophony of voices. I covered my ears, yet the sound cut through, boring into my mind as each word came sharper, more insistent. I turned and ran, jostling blindly through the darkness, hands flung out before me in search of an exit. The whispers followed, growing louder, more frantic, until they became a scream, a chorus of voices, each one calling my name. I stumbled, my hand brushing against something solid, a door. I fumbled for the handle, my fingers slipping on the cold metal, and yanked it open. Light exploded in my vision, blinding me as I stumbled forward, collapsing onto the cold tile of the store floor. The silence was complete and entire, the whispers gone, replaced by the steady hum of the lights overhead. I looked around, blinking as my eyes adjusted to the brightness. The store was deserted, silent, like it had been before. Yet as I stood, I knew something was off. The monitors in the security office had black, cracked screens and were covered with a thick layer of dust. Aisles were different, shelves empty, as if nobody had entered this place for years. I staggered out into the night, gasping for breath as I looked around. The parking lot was deserted, the neon sign off, the windows smeared by filth. Riverside Market had been abandoned, the building worn and remembered only by history, as if it hadn't been opened since decades ago. I did not look back, the feeling in my head racing, trying to make sense of it all. But as I hit the outskirts, a thought came in with it, a chill ran down my spine. In the back seat, lying in the shadows, was the crumpled note with tonight's rules. And written at the bottom, in that same cramped handwriting, was a single line I hadn't noticed before. Welcome to Riverside Market. Once you come inside, you're never really alone anymore.